War Beneath the Roots is a fantasy fiction podcast. While rooted in tabletop storytelling, this is a fully written narrative crafted for audio. Video versions are available to enhance the experience with maps and art, but they're not necessary. This podcast contains violence and themes that may not be suitable for all audiences. She staggered into Bostow. Night wrapped the streets in oil-slick shadows. Lanterns flickered on slick cobbles. Rats slipped between battered carts and empty barrels. Her scarred arm throbbed beneath damp cloth. Every heartbeat a drum. Coins slid from her trembling fingers onto wood counters. No hand reached for them. Merchants recoiled at her approach, eyes burning with fear. A half-dead dog snarled from a refuse pile. It met her eyes and slunk away. Hunger knotted in her gut. Cravings twisted through her veins. Earthy, sour, alive. She dipped into narrower alleys. Each wheel's creak cut through the hush. She passed a stall of cracked pottery. The shards looked like teeth. In a collapsed courtyard, moss climbed over fractured statues. Damp air pressed close. She knelt in the mud. Her palm met cold, pulsing stone. A whisper through the crack in the ground. Closer. The ground buckled into roots. Walls bled black petals around her. Windows rattled, dry, hollow, mocking. She sank to her knees. Nails gouged granite. Blood mingled with moss. The air tasted of rot. Her breath ragged. She clawed herself upright. Hunger burned behind her eyes, and she drifted on into the night. I am Benjamin Harris. Welcome to War Beneath the Roots. Chapter 7. They awoke in Ironhold to the scent of hearth smoke and frying eggs. The tavern below was quiet save for the clink of dishes, Father Aylen waiting at a table with warm bread and dried meats laid out, a farewell offering. Blue emerged last, head pounding and shoulders slumped from the late night. Father Aylen looked at them with weary eyes. Blue leaned forward, voice low. We finish this. The threat isn't over. Markin shook his head. Not yet. We should report to Aylen Redding. She needs to know everything. And she might have what you want. He paused. Information on Alathontor. Blue scowled, torn, but the name hit like a hammer in his chest. After a long silence, he nodded once. Fine. Kita first. They rose from the table, shoulders heavier but resolute. Outside, Ironhold Square was already stirring, townsfolk hauling bodies away in rough carts, sweeping blood and broken stone into wheelbarrows, tendrils of smoke still drifting from the evening's activities. Markin slung his pack over one shoulder. Beam's moss cloak stirred as he stepped onto the street. Roots curled back onto the cobbles. Blue fell in beside him, axe strapped to his back, eyes narrowed on the square. Mr. E tucked his pocket watch away with a soft click. Together they passed under the ruined arch where the temporary shrine had stood. Now only cracked flags and fresh sawdust marked its place, and gathered their horses and cart from the stable near the front gate. The path to Kita lay open, the morning sun cutting through the mist like a promise. With a shared breath they rode out of Ironhold, leaving its disheveled streets behind. They made camp where the road pinched between two ridges, fresh moonlight slashing the trees into black pillars. The fire was small, just enough to keep the cold worms of night at bay. Above them, stars winked through ragged clouds. The forest hummed with life. Markin lay back against his pack, eyes on the flickering embers. Blue snored in soft rumbles beside him. Mr. E sat by the dying fire, one finger tapping his watch deep in thought. Beam rested beyond the ring of light roots curling into the earth, listening. Sometimes Markin thought he heard claws raking bark. Sometimes a broken whisper drifted through the pines, too shallow to be wind, too ragged to be a bird call. His heart thumped each time the branches creaked. He'd sat up, listened. He could feel something watching him from the shadows, but the undergrowth never parted. No shape stepped into the light. No howl launched from the dark. The forest swallowed its secrets and let them sleep in turn. Morning came on a blade of cold air. They broke camp wordlessly and mounted horses, Markin's hand still shaking from the night's shadows. The road was empty, but for a few carts and a couple single riders headed south. Churned ruts and flattened brush, where creatures had passed. Mr. E rode last, eyes flicking from tree line to sky as though expecting something to happen. 2 hours in, they spotted a lone rider tearing down the road, cloak flapping, horse's flanks frothing. The messenger's eyes were wide with dread when Markin reined him in. "Kida!" the rider gasped, voice raw. "They've struck at dawn. Hobgoblins pouring through the northeast and southeast gates. Ogres behind them. The city, it's..." Markin's heart clenched. He looked to the others. "We ride hard," he ordered. "No breaks." They galloped like storm unleashed, hooves drumming the earth, man and beast straining against leather and steel. The wind tore at them, carrying the scent of smoke and blood before they could see the battlements. By midday they crested a low rise and saw the walls of Kida, once proud, now streaked with black soot and crimson. From the ridges they could see hundreds of hobgoblins pouring through the southwest gate, like a tide of locusts. The portcullis stood raised and intact, twisted bodies heaped far below its iron teeth. North of them, 15 ogres lumbered forward, massive silhouettes moving toward the breach. Markin's heart sank. The enemy flooded Kida's streets. Something about this felt wrong. Too organized, too brutal, too fast. "They're inside," Markin muttered, too quiet for the others to hear over the hooves slamming the ground. They plunged through the ruined tent city. Canvas shreds fluttered like broken wings. Smoldering campfires lay tangled with collapsed tents, belongings scattered. Markin's throat clenched as he rode over a splintered cot. He thought of his mother and sister, gone when the assault began, and felt a raw surge of relief. They charged into the back of the swarming hobgoblins. As the others dismounted, Markin slowed down. From horseback he loosed arrows in rapid succession. Throat, eye socket, breastplate, until one hissed past a charging scout and buried itself in the dirt. Guilt twisted in his gut. Fear of more loss. Blue crashed into the fray, axe-splitting shields and bone. Mr. E danced between the bodies from Blue's onslaught, flicking his watch open and closed to seize small pockets of frozen time. Hobgoblins suspended, mid-scream before the world convulsed back into motion, their bodies already mangled by Blue's axe. Beam strode forward, spores hissing from his bark. The hobgoblins in range gasped as from within their flesh, acid-hot veins burst steam and screams as skin boiled from the inside out. They reached the open gate, iron bars gleaming, no splintered wood, no broken winch. It had been lifted from within. The ogres thundered closer, club-wielding brutes with tusks and scabbed scars. Their roars shook the walls. Markin's bowstring hummed as he exhaled. "We hold this!" Markin snarled, knocking an arrow. One sailed high, landing in front of the ogres. Blue hefted a fallen hobgoblin pike like a javelin and hurled it at the lead ogre, skewering its thigh. The beast staggered but pressed on. Beam's form shifted, bark and bone stretched and cracked. In a gust of rending feathers he transformed into a colossal eagle, wings spanning the gate's width. He dove into the ogres, talons rending flesh, lifting one above the ground before dropping it atop its comrades. Markin loosed another arrow, this time finding tendon in a lumbering ogre's neck. The ogre fell, flailing in a tide of blood and gristle. Mr. E crouched at the gate's side, tracing runes in the ground. "Paquito!" he hissed. Spectral golden scales shimmered around them, immediately deflecting a hobgoblin spear from impaling Blue's torso as he charged through the hobgoblin. He reached the side mechanism and began yanking at the chain, muscles quaking. Beam swooped low, talons tearing at two more ogres from behind in mid-charge, sending them crashing into the gatehouse wall either side of the gate. The first ogre breached the courtyard, tusks stained dark with old blood. The hulking ogre stepped through the gate, roared, and swung downward. Markin dove sideways, the club smashing stone where he had been. He rolled, bow forgotten, and sprang up, sword drawn. Dodging the beast's next blow, he let out a whimper. The ogre's breath reeked of old meat. The stink hit Markin as he forced his blade between the plates of its crude armor, piercing flesh in a sudden thrust before attempting to run. With a final, roar-filled heave, Blue seized the chain. The portcullis clanged downward, iron teeth biting toward the frame. An ogre howled as it sank into its back and trapped the bulk of the horde outside. The last ogre inside the courtyard shifted his attention from Markin to Beam as a great eagle swooped down, seizing him mid-flight, sending them both crashing into the wall. The ogre gained his senses first, pummeling Beam with his fists, as the great eagle lost his magical form, reverting back to his normal state of living root and stone. Mr. E pulled 3 magical bolts, shaped like clock hands, from within the ogre, backward in time to his hands, a throw reversed. The ogre collapsed as the holes in its chest and head where the bolts had been flowed like a dark river. Atop the battlements now, Markin and Kita's militia rained arrows down on the retreating ogres. Silence roared in their ears, heaps of fallen allies and foes around them. Markin lowered his bow, legs trembling. He looked down at Beam, a battered and broken tree lying in the crumbled wall, and felt the weight of victory turn sour. Mr. E sank to one knee, hand still on his sputtering watch, drained. Blue sheathed his axe, shoulders heaving. The gate held, but Kita bled beyond its walls. They moved into the city's shattered streets, hobgoblins crushed under militia boots, wounded guards clutching whatever remained of their honor, townspeople wailing over their dead and missing, the air thick with smoke and despair. And at every step Markin felt the weight of the battle. They had saved the city, but it didn't feel like a victory. Chapter 8. The streets ran red, smoke rising from the alleyways, thick as winter fog, curling around the corpses of hobgoblins and Catanians alike. Markin limped through the blood-slick cobbles, bow clenched in hand. Every breath tasted of soot and copper. From the north came a distant horn, low, guttural, and long. A nobleman in muddy, once fine clothes clutched Markin's sleeve, wide-eyed. "The northeast gate! Gods, did they breach it too?" They moved fast, cutting through the dying city. People staggered from burning buildings, soot-streaked faces numb with grief. A woman wailed over the body of her child, a guardsman's intestines slick and trailing, propped against a cart, whispered a prayer he couldn't finish. As they neared the eastern quarter, the sounds grew louder, roars, screams, the dull crash of metal. They crested the hill and froze. The northeast gate still held. Catanian militia lined the battlements, bows drawn, eyes fixed beyond the wall. Just outside the range of their arrows, battle raged in the field. The Guardians had come. Dozens of them, armored in twisted bark and bone, tore into the enemy in waves, some as men and women, others as beasts, snarling wolves, antlered stags, bears matted with gore. But the ogres held. Hobgoblins fought in disciplined ranks, shields braced and blades slick with blood. A wolf leapt at a hobgoblin captain and met a hammer mid-air. Bones snapped. The beast crumpled, shifted back into a man, and did not rise. An ogre seized a charging druid by the throat and drove him into the ground once, twice, until his skull caved in. But the forest fought back. Vines burst from the soil, wrapping a hobgoblin's legs and dragging him screaming into the brush where waiting wolves tore him apart. A bear, jaw crimson, smashed through a shield wall, roaring loud enough to rattle teeth. Overhead, a hawk with burning eyes screamed and dove, vanishing in a flash of light that left scorched earth and burning enemies behind. From this distance, it was chaos. Not a rout, not a rescue, just death. The line between beast and man, between nature and war, had blurred. For a breathless moment, no one spoke. The battlefield churned with violence, but it was a violence that felt ancient. Markin's chest tightened. Cassandra. His sister was one of them now. Could she be an animal? Would she be able to fight? Didn't matter, she was out there. He broke into a run before the others could stop him. Beam reached out, but the boy was already loosing arrows as he ran. The first shaft thudded into the neck of a hobgoblin, aiming a javelin at a shifting druid. Another skipped off a shield. A third found an ogre's chest with little effect. He didn't stop to count his shots. Beam glided over the battlefield, attempting to catch up. He flung his hand toward a cluster of hobgoblins, and spores burst from his body in a green cloud. Screams followed, wet and raw, as skin blistered and eyes went milky. Vines erupted beneath their feet, splitting the earth and dragging muffled hobgoblins into the ground. Mr. E appeared in a shimmer of golden light. One hand clutched to his chest, the other raised as if steadying something. Around him, time faltered. Ogres that Markin found himself between slowed, their hammer and club dragging in the air like they moved through honey. Blue bellowed like a thunderclap and tore into the ogres, catching the full weight of his steel. Bones split, muscles peeled back like butchered meat. Blue didn't stop. He kept moving, swinging in wide arcs, spraying blood like paint. Markin fired another arrow, then another. "Cassandra!" he screamed, but it was lost to the roar of war. Beam convulsed. His back snapped and bent unnaturally. His arms became hard as stone, twisting. Where Beam had stood, a monstrous scorpion reared up, black and glistening. Claws hard and sharp, it shrieked with no mouth, its stinger lashing down to impale a hobgoblin, flinging the corpse backward toward the city. The ground shook beneath them. A roar split the air, darker, deeper than any ogre's. They saw him before he struck, the Ogre King, nearly 20 feet tall, looming over the battlefield like a fractured mountain of flesh. His yellow-chipped tusks jutted from a mouth of broken teeth. A rusted iron crown sat atop his misshapen skull. In one colossal hand he wielded a cleaver forged from a large spine, barbed with hooks. In the other, a gnarled staff of bleached bone wrapped in barbed wire, pulsing with magic. He stood towering above his guards, 10 of them, each taller than the average ogre, their muscles knotted with matching rune scars. Their eyes gleamed with a cruel intelligence. Beam's scorpion claws clattered on stone as he reared to meet the onslaught. 2 ogres charged, clubbing at his armored shell. He cut off the ogre's foot before the great pincer cracked beneath a brutal blow. He lashed back only to be gored through the side. Black ichor spurted in ribbons. Blue charged the ogres, axe swinging in wild arcs. 2 ogres gutted before the third caught the haft of his axe, splintering it like dry wood. Blue stumbled, raw bones snapping outward from his forearm. He roared, raising the shaftless blade, but a guard's hammer smashed him in the back of the head as he looked up. His bones shattered, skull collapsing beneath the blow. He fell, axe tumbling from lifeless fingers. Mr. E huddled behind a pillar, voice ragged as he whispered a time lock. The air trembled. The king's cleaver froze mid-swing, but the staff in his hand glowed bright pink as the chrono magic splintered. Mr. E's watch cracked, golden scales shivering and falling away from his allies as quickly as they'd formed. Time snapped back with a scream. Markin's vision blurred. He loosed arrow after arrow. One buried itself in a guard's neck, another pierced an ogre's eye. Where had the druids gone? Were they all dead? Did they run away? Beam's shell split. The scorpion convulsed, shaking limbs until bark and vine retook shape. He lay broken but breathing where his scorpion form died. Markin retreated toward Kita, loosing his last few arrows as he glanced over at Blue. No. The Ogre King strode forward, cleaver raised like a death knell. Blue tried to rise, a faint spark of life in one shattered eye. He spat blood at the king's boots in defiance. The cleaver fell. It cut Blue in two through his chest. Blue screamed, half man, half myth, before he went limp. Silence roared in Markin's ears as he fell to his knees, his world narrowing to that broken body. Mr. E's eyes snapped shut as he lifted his cracked watch aloft. First came a single, brilliant pulse, like the dawn's first star flaring in the void, casting long, silvery shadows across the battlefield. Gears spun outward from the watch face, huge and translucent, their teeth made of pure light. The world halted for a moment, air rippled, fracturing into 1,000 crystal facets, carrying the whispers of before and again on every gust. The cleaver once buried to its hilt trembled backward, sliding free in a flash of sparks that rained upward like scorching snow. Blue's wounds hissed shut in reverse bloom, jagged ribs sealing with a lattice of light, blood climbing backward along its channels, flowing into his wounds until his chest was whole once more. He inhaled, lungs bursting like a first breath. At that same heartbeat, a horn blasted from Kita's walls, a staccato call to arms. From the gate swung open beyond Markin's shoulder, a tide of militia poured out. Steel-clad guards, pikes bristling, shields locked. Behind them, archers knocked arrows, drawing bowstrings. Markin guessed maybe 30 of them in total. "Steady!" the sergeant shouted as two ogres lumbered into the fray alongside their king. The ogres' clubbed fists smashed through the pike wall, splintering wood and tearing shields free. A dozen guards fell under those brutal blows, helms crushed, blood spraying like dark rain. "Loose!" the sergeant yelled. As the front line knelt, arrows hissed overhead. The ogre caught multiple arrows in the face and neck area. Staggering backward, Markin noticed multiple pikes embedded in his massive gut. The other ogre fell, a porcupine of arrows. The Ogre King advanced, alone, cleaver held high. He cleaved 3 guards in a single swing, blood arcing in fountains, then charged through the shattering pikes and shields as he barreled through the men like a maelstrom. The militia crumbled around him. He was bleeding. Dozens of arrows jutted from his flesh like the spine of some ancient beast, but he wouldn't fall. His eyes blazed with stubborn, primal fury. Around him lay the butchered bodies of Kita's finest. Markin crouched behind the shattered husk of a wagon, breath ragged. His fingers trembled on the bowstring, his last arrow. He looked to his friends. Blue lay chest heaving, unable to stand. Mr. E was unconscious, or worse. Perhaps Markin hadn't noticed Mr. E being attacked. Beam rose from the blood-soaked earth, limping from where the ogres had crushed his scorpion form. His spores drifted out in thin, trembling clouds across the field as he looked at Markin. Focus. Together. Anger. He saw Blue's blood on the stones, the memory of Eliza's body, the thought that his sister May lay dead somewhere in this field. He rose, closed his eyes, exhaled, opened his eyes, and loosed. The arrow didn't fly, it sang. A straight line through war and ruin, it pierced the Ogre King's throat from the side. Not deep enough, but enough to make him choke, to rear his head and roar in pain, and stumble. And that's when the spores came. The scream that came from Beam's body was not a voice. It was a shriek of bursting steam, pulled from the roots of the world. His body split and bent, bones popping like overripe fruit as he transformed, doubling in size. His form was broad and hulking, a warped elk-like beast with jagged antlers of blackened fungus and hooves that pulsed with living spores. Moss and mushroom plated his hide. His mouth split open in too many directions. A mycelial horror. The Ogre King turned, too slow. Beam struck. Antlers plunged into the ogre's chest, driving him back with impossible strength. As the Ogre King staggered, Markin's arrow still trembling in his throat, Beam reared and unleashed a torrent of spores, green and silver, directly into the ogre's face and beyond. The giant choked, screamed. He bent over and clawed at his own skull. Beam leapt upward, catching the ogre in the face with his twisted antlers. The body crashed, shaking the ground. The cleaver hit the ground with a hollow finality. For a moment the field stood still, only the sound of the Ogre King's face boiling and sizzling from the spores. And as Beam began transforming back to his normal state, the wind picked up, and with it his spores scattered, grief, fury, the bitter tang of a costly victory. The smoke thinned over the ruined field. Crows circled overhead, their cries sharp in the still air. From the tree line beyond the battlefield, what few druids remained emerged slowly, bloodied, limping, eyes hollow with grief. Their animal shapes had been shed, replaced with weary flesh. Beam lay slumped against a scorched stump, his breath shallow. The last embers of his transformation hissed faintly in the cool wind. The grass around him was dying, curling away like it feared him. Markin moved to Mr. E. The old man was still. The only sign of life was his chest moving slowly up and down. There were no signs of injury. He watched as the handful of druids moved toward Beam and reluctantly decided to leave Mr. E. He quickened his pace, watching Blue struggle to his feet in an attempt to join him. Two figures detached themselves from the rest of the druids. Markin scanned all of their faces and winced as he realized none were his sister. The two figures stepped forward toward Beam as Markin arrived, their gnarled hoods covering half of their faces. The first raised a hand and spoke to Beam without preamble. "This place has seen too much of your power." Markin glanced back at Beam. He looked exhausted, but uninjured. Markin said nothing. He had seen that power. The second druid knelt beside Beam, scattering a handful of ashen petals over Beam's head. The other druids moved forward, forming a circle around Beam, chanting in a low rhythmic cadence. A raven landed on one of the druid's shoulders, placing a small red flower into his hand. He crushed the flower carefully and blew its pieces into the circle of druids. Simultaneously, the druids let out a gasp, as if seeing something that Markin could not. "We honor your fight," the first elder went on, turning to Markin and Blue. "But the grove cannot suffer this magic." Markin swallowed. "You'd cast him out?" The second druid's eyes gleamed beneath her hood. "He is no longer holy of the forest." Beam's spores pulsed sharply. Anger. Sorrow. Understanding. Blue's breath hissed through his teeth. He raised a horned brow at Markin, waiting. Markin looked down at Beam's broken form. His chest felt heavy, the weight of a friend and a home slipping away. "We go with him," Markin said at last. "Beyond the Fellgrove." "Beyond Kedah," the first druid added flatly. Markin winced. The elder gave a single curt nod. "Take him away, and may the wild forgive what you carry." Beam's spores pulsed weary, and something distant Markin couldn't quite name. Hope. Markin took a breath, the question bursting from him before he could stop it. "Where's Cassandra?" The druids exchanged glances. A pause. Then the second answered. "She's on a pilgrimage, to learn what she must from the old forests on the central landmass." Thanks for listening to War Beneath the Roots. If you enjoyed this story so far, consider following or subscribing and leaving a review. Until next time, keep your blade sharp and your fire burning.